Should I?
Yeah, if you want to, you could.
Okay, I can do that.
I find it helps. All right.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Addressing Gettysburg. Today we have our new friend Brad Gottfried back on. I think it's only been a month since you were on the first time.
Yeah, about then.
But we had a lot of fun with you, and you are a prolific writer, so we have plenty of things to talk about. And today we're talking about, this is your latest book, right? The most recent one?
That's correct, yes.
Lincoln Comes to Gettysburg by Brad and Linda, his wife.
I want to forget her now.
She's not here, but we want the domestic tranquility to remain.
Thank you.
We're going to mention her as well.
Appreciate that,
But of
Matt.
course we should. All right, Brad. So the Lincoln Comes to Gettysburg, of course, he comes for the dedication of the cemetery here, the National Cemetery.
Right.
But I think some people, as we were discussing before, might have this impression that the federal government just swooped down from on high and created a national cemetery right up there adjacent to Evergreen Cemetery. But that's not how it came about at all, correct?
That is very much a falsehood.
So how did this cemetery come about that Lincoln would eventually come to dedicate?
Sure. Well, there's so many cast of characters. I mean, when you think about it, it took a variety of individuals all working together to make this happen. Mm-hmm. And I oftentimes refer to this as the second battle of Gettysburg, mm-hmm. because it almost didn't happen because two very influential figures that we can talk about later on went head-to-head fighting each other, McConaughey and Wills.
Now you say McConaughey.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Dave McConaughey.
Not McConaughey or McConaughey.
I've given up trying to. I didn't even pronounce my name incorrectly, so I don't worry about him. But as long as you know about who I'm talking about.
Yeah. The actor, Matthew McConaughey.
So it was a act where people worked benevolently. We don't see as much of that as we'd like in today's society, especially at the national level. But here, people from many different states got together and did the right thing.
Cooperated.
Definitely. And it's interesting, Matt, I'm a Gettysburg licensed town guide. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite tours is our Lincoln tour. And when I was preparing it, I'd go to different books and I'd prepare. And every one of them, they're thick. And it's like, if I have a passing interest in Lincoln and the cemetery, et cetera, do I really want to wade through this?
Right.
And so when the opportunity arose, this is the Emerging Civil War series. We're talking under 200 pages.
Yes.
What I wanted was, and what my wife wanted, was an easy read.
And it is.
It is.
But it's not by any means chintzy.
No.
You got a lot of stuff in here.
There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot. And what I like about the series, and those who know the Emerging series, on every single page, there's one or two illustrations. Drove us crazy. And that's what my wife was. She was the one. I'm surprised she has any hair left on her head. But she's the one who's getting all of the illustrations together. And it's not just finding an illustration. It has to be at least 300 dots per inch.
Right.
And
DPI.
Yes, and it has to flow. And what was probably very difficult was when you have a figure like Beisinger, Frank Beisinger, who actually got the contract to exhume the dead and rebury them. We couldn't find any photographs of him. We found Townsend and we found Weaver, who we hired to do the actual work. But Beisinger, we couldn't find anything. And that's frustrating. Or to find a photograph that says, yeah, there's that guy or gal, but it's such poor quality that you can't use it.
Isn't it annoying to think that people in times before us weren't so interested in taking their pictures as we are today?
Fascinating, yes. And what's even more fascinating is, again, as a guide, we have so many photographs of the men of Gettysburg.
Yeah.
Charles Tyson, who had a photographic studio. Mm-hmm. You don't have one of his wife, though. And or John Schick, who had a general store, dry goods store on the square. where the House of Times
Right.
was.
The O-Man. I
yeah,
think
that's it.
That's the store there now.
There's nothing about his wife. And so it's interesting how, again, lots of photographs of certain people, very few of slaves or people of color.
Right.
And, he had some of children, but white children. And
Yeah.
so that was a real problem, that uncovering enough illustrations that really helped to tell the story.
So, okay, let's go back then to the beginning.
Okay.
So the battle happens, and who's the first local resident to think, hey, we should probably buy some land and set it aside to bury the battle dead?
Well, it goes even before that, Matt.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So it really starts actually with a governor who, to my way of thinking, does not get enough credit, and that's Andrew Curtin.
Mm-hmm.
This guy's in his 30s. I mean, he's not even 40 years old yet. He's in his first term. He's a Republican. He's a good friend of Lincoln.
Okay.
And think about it. Governor Seymour has just won the governorship of the state of New York. He's a Democrat. So the largest state in the Union that's still Republican is Pennsylvania. And so Lincoln's pretty shrewd. That's one thing I've learned about Lincoln. He is no dummy.
No.
And he knew that he needed Ohio, he needed Pennsylvania in order to be reelected. And so he's kind of close to Curtin. And so, but Curtin is the one who is, to me, the star of the whole show. If it weren't for Andrew Curtin, the governor of Pennsylvania, this cemetery would never have happened.
Yeah, the more I read about all this stuff, the more interesting he becomes to me, because
Yes.
he does seem like he's a hands-on governor for
Very
sure.
much so.
Right? Like he's running around crazy just like some spy out in the field is. Like he's into it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of refreshing to see in a politician.
No question about
Yeah.
it.
Like
No
he actually
question.
cares.
Yes. In
Yeah.
fact, he cared so deeply during the earlier campaign when Lee invaded the North initially in 1862. He actually developed a spy network that went into Maryland and other places and some parts of Pennsylvania. And he's actually getting information on the size of Lee's army. Now, true, it was wildly exaggerated, but the location. And he was starting to get ready. He was going to call out the militia back in 1862. There wasn't a whole lot of space from the time that Lee began the invasion to the actual Battle of Antietam. So he never really had time to really get the militia out. But at Gettysburg campaign, he had about a month or so. And what I find so fascinating is this guy had no fear. He basically says to Secretary of War Stanton, Edwin Stanton, I don't trust you. I don't trust the Army of the Potomac that you're going to be able to defend the citizens of Pennsylvania. So I am going to call out the militia. And he's going to have over 30,000 militiamen who are going to be joining the militia to try to help save Pennsylvania. And you don't find that kind of approach,
No.
in most governors. But he took it very, very seriously, being governor.
And like today, I'm thinking of during the lockdown period of the last couple of years. I did notice some governors playing kind of politics because they didn't like the president, and so they would withhold receiving some kind of aid or something like that because they wanted to. I don't know, whatever. They just wanted to be petty or whatever,
Or the other way.
or the other way around.
Yes.
And so today, or not today, but like Curtin isn't saying that as a rival of Lincoln's or as a partisan. He's on the same side as Lincoln.
Right.
But he just knows that the federal government is generally inept.
That's correct. And this Army of the Potomac, think about it. They've lost, before this was Chancellorsville, before that was Fredericksburg.
Yep.
Both major Union losses. Antietam was, it was a Union victory, but
Not as great a victory.
it was not a clear cut.
Right.
And so the Union Army, the Army of the Potomac, did not have a good record against Robert E. Lee. And here comes Lee, and he definitely is coming north. He's coming into Pennsylvania. What am I going to do as governor? Am I just going to sit back and rub my hands together and say, oh, Mike, what am I going to do? They're going to capture Harrisburg and Philadelphia? Or am I going to raise troops such as the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment, and at least try to stop Lee as best I can. At least I can say I did my best, rather
Right.
than just sit around and do nothing. So,
And of
good
course,
guy.
if that's the way things shook out, and of course it would be a slaughter, then he would of course get the blame for slaughtering all of. Yeah, so it was
He's going to get the blame no matter
right.
what.
But I've been saying that's a pretty scary position to put yourself
Yes.
in as a governor. Is you're going to put the militia, the untested
Yes.
militia, between your capital and your people and the invading army, and say to the veteran army that's been in the field for a couple of years, no, I don't think you can handle that. I mean, that's
Right.
ballsy or crazy. I'm not sure.
Yes.
But I think in his case, ballsy. And luckily for him, the Army of the Potomac
it
came in
prevailed.
and,
Yeah.
and
He-
won. But
and won.
yeah,
But you think about it. I mean, they recruited all of these men from Adams County. You know, they put them into this emergency regiment, sent them to Camp Curtin for some training, and brought them back on the 26th of June. And here they are marching down Chambersburg Street from the railroad station, and they're going to face Jubal Early's thousands of veterans. I mean, talking about putting untrained guys in harm's way, that's a good example.
well, exactly. Now imagine like what 10 or 20,000 of them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just going to be people running all over the place, wide-eyed and terrified.
And that's what happened. And
Yeah.
fortunately, their commander said, "Hey, let's get the heck out of here."
Right.
But you're right. If Gettysburg had turned out differently, and some of those young men were captured by Jubal Early's division, he would have been vilified
Yeah.
for his actions.
For sure.
So it's damned if you do and damned if you don't. Really.
And that's why I don't get into politics, because I can't win either way. So why bother? All right. So how is it his idea, though? How does
Okay.
it start with him?
So here's a governor, and again, this is Brad Gottfried's perspective, but I've been reading about him, and I'm very, very impressed with the man. So he believed strongly that as governor, I am here for the common man.
Yeah.
So he's busy. You know, he's really busy during the battle, after the battle, but he finally gets to Gettysburg about on the 10th, so about a week after the battle's over. He wants to see firsthand, not through an aide, not through observers. He wants to see what it's like here. He wants to look at the battlefield, but more importantly, he wants to talk to townspeople and see, are you guys okay? You know, what do you need? What can I help you with? And as he comes in from the train, he's met by a very young Republican attorney, David Wills, and who will escort him all around during his visit. And so that's the major reason why Curtin is here. He wants to see what's happening, and how can I help? You know, it's like a flood or a tornado or a hurricane. The president, the governor, you know.
Yeah, they go visit.
How can I help?
Yeah.
But he's going to do it in a much more tangible way. He's going to really roll up his sleeves as much as he possibly can. And so what's going to happen then is he doesn't come up with the idea. No one comes up with the idea. Remember, national cemeteries were not typical back then.
Right.
I mean, Arlington was getting started, but that was about it.
Right.
And so as he's going back to the train station and Wills is with him, he says, "Oh, by the way, I need an agent. You're it." And Wills says, "Oh, okay. Well, now remember, he's a successful attorney.
Right.
He has to put aside his practice to be the governor's agent. Now, what is an agent? Let's say, Matt, you have a son, let's say, or a brother who's in the Army of the Potomac. Let's say he's in the 150th Pennsylvania, and you don't hear from him. You have no idea. Did he survive? Is he wounded? Is he dead? And so you write to the agent, which is Wills, or you come physically, and you are expected to help that person. Now, you have to understand, I have some statistics here.
All right.
There are 8,000 dead total from, total 1,000 Pennsylvanians are dead on the battlefield. 1,300 are wounded. 4,000 are wounded, and 1,300 are missing. And so a lot of these families are saying, okay, tell me what happened to my loved one. So he doesn't have a telephone. He doesn't have the computer. So he has to literally go over to the 1st Division or the 1st Corps hospital and find out, okay, is John Smith from the 150th here? And no, he's not here, but his buddies are here. And he talks to the buddies and, oh, no, he made it. And so that, and then let's say your loved one is dead. He's going to be the one you're going to be your agent to get him embalmed, to get him into a coffin, to get him on a train and send him home.
Wills.
As the agent.
Wow.
And so he says, I didn't think this was going to be as much work as it is. And he's working like not 24 hours a day, but he could have easily.
Yeah.
And there are other agents. Every state has their own agent because it's the same kind of approach. If you're from Michigan, you have loved ones wanting to know what happened to their child or their brother or their family member, etc. So that's how it really starts, that you have 18 of these guys, they're all guys, one from each state, and they're doing their thing. But they're realizing that, whoa, this is not a good situation. In fact, when Wills is taking Governor Curtin around, Curtin is horrified by what he's seeing. I mean,
well, anybody would be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, was Curtin a veteran? Has he ever been in a...
No.
So he had never seen this anywhere,
never seen
ever.
anything like this. And, when you think about, 8,000 bodies, now, true, by the time he got there, most of the Union, in fact, all of the Union men had been killed, were buried.
Right.
But there's still some Confederates that were still not buried. Imagine after a full week in the hot July sun, what they must have, the stench, no matter whether they were buried or not, and all of the horses, all the dead mules. So he was smelling the horrible smells, the odors that were coming out of the dead, etc. Number one. He was seeing all of the vermin, the insects, the rats, and what makes it worse. And I think about this, and I try not to think about this, but the feral pigs.
I was just going to say
that were on the battlefield, and you knew that they were feasting on these dead bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's very worried about the health of the citizens of Gettysburg.
Sure, rightfully so. But so let's kind of set the scene a little bit, a little bit more than what you're saying there, because we were talking about this prior to recording. Mm-hmm. So you got the vermin, you got the bugs, the flies.
Yep.
The stench.
Yep.
What else were we talking about earlier that the people had to deal with there? Well, I mean, the stench. Let's just talk about that for a second. Yeah. So we were talking about how when my dog got sprayed by a skunk, and how the smell gets on everything.
Yes.
Even if the dog doesn't touch it, it just is in the air. It gets on your clothes and your closet, and you just got to wait it out. For a while. And for like 2 weeks, I kept walking around smelling like a damn skunk. No matter how much I washed my clothes, I could smell it. Was like in my nose. I could just smell it everywhere.
Oh, yes.
When I'm eating, when I'm sleeping, when I'm brushing my teeth, when I'm taking a drink, when I'm somewhere else, I'm always smelling it. How annoying is that? Like, that is enough to drive you crazy. So now imagine everywhere you go in your hometown, you're smelling the smell of what you know to be decaying human flesh.
That, and you've got all these flies and blowflies, black flies, and where they've been.
Yes. Right, so one lands on your hand and he just feasted on a soldier.
Yes.
Oh, that's disgusting.
And what makes it worse, Matt, is that it was so bad. Imagine here it is July, you live in town, you have no place to go. You can't, there's no air conditioning, obviously, there's no fans. You have to keep your windows closed. Imagine how hot, like ovens. And when they did go out, they would have to, the only way they could survive was putting peppermint oil, either under their nose or in a handkerchief. And people would say, well, how can you survive here? And they'd say, well, where can I go?
Well, right. It's
And
not
then
like
worse than that, or almost as worse, you know, you had the Confederates, thousands of Confederates in the town for several days. Their gardens, their livestock, they were all gone.
all
So
gone.
they're actually, the winter of 1863-64, they were close to starvation.
Oh, you know, I'd never even thought of the winter, but yeah, they must
it was
have been,
horrible.
right?
Yes.
And I can't. One of the kids, it was either McCurdy or McCready or one of those boys.
Yeah.
He had said that the people of Gettysburg were on the verge of thirsting to death before the Christian Commission came in with water. I think was it the
yes.
Christian Commission?
Yeah, Christian
Yeah.
Commission came in. The Sanitary Commission also came in as well.
I mean, that's something that never occurred to me until I read
Right.
that. Is that the water around has either been like every well has either been sucked dry or full of limbs or just
Yeah.
somehow polluted that you can't use it anymore.
When you think about 7,000 Confederates in the town, all drawing water
Yeah.
from these wells, and then think about it. These guys are not going and knocking on the door and saying, "Can I use your outhouse behind your house?" And so the unsanitary conditions of human fecal waste and urine everywhere in the streets. There were still some horses and mules that probably were still around. I mean, they were finding bodies months later. In fact, David Wills actually later on in the process puts out an advertisement asking people, "Are there any bodies you're aware of? We think we've got them all, but we're not certain," because they
Right.
were finding some up in trees, they were finding up in bushes that they were not obvious.
I
It's
can't
none
imagine.
of us can really understand the
No,
horror.
it sounds like a horror movie. I mean, people in trees and yeah.
Ugh.
And when they were buried in the first place, they weren't buried well.
No.
No, so they're easily exposed. If they're probably already exposed, but a couple of rains go by,
Ugh.
and now they're visible and stuff. So of course animals are going to start rooting through there.
That's right.
It had to be. There had to be so the armies invade the area, they fight a battle, they leave.
Right.
So they come in, it scares the wildlife away.
Right.
They leave. Now there's all these dead bodies everywhere, and now the wildlife is like, "Hey man, let's go back to Gettysburg. We could eat for free for." It's like going on a cruise.
like a smorgasbord, a buffet.
It's like go to the Sizzler.
We're talking 12 inches of dirt, maybe 18,
not
because
enough.
the key was we've got to get these guys underground. And as you said, all it took was a good rain. And when
Or how about a good bloat? Like guys who hadn't bloated
Oh.
yet, but they buried them with a foot of dirt. You think that bloat's just going to wash it all or just, wipe it all away as their bellies get bigger
Yep. And they explode.
and they explode.
Yes.
I mean, we're laughing because it's so uncomfortable, but I mean, it's a horror show. It is frightening.
And yes, and for those who were citizens who would go out on the battlefield after the battle and to see the horrific sights of men who were cut up and killed and maimed, I mean, headless.
Well, you got that
arms
quote
shot
from
off.
the 17th Maine guy.
Yeah,
Read that to everybody because if this doesn't paint a picture, I don't know what does.
Yes,
And, I was just thinking too, besides the, fully dead bodies, like after they've removed them, well, I mean, that was all later on, but, after they've buried those bodies initially on the battlefield, there's still got to be thousands of chunks of meat, of limbs, just that weren't buried because they flew up in the air and landed somewhere else.
it's everywhere. I mean, bits of flesh, bits of equipment, material, parts of uniforms.
It's just you can't fathom it
We can't.
until you see it.
No.
All right, so go ahead. What's that quote?
Okay, so this is John Halsey. He's with the 17th Maine, fought on Oak Ridge. No, I take that back. He was at the wheat field.
Yeah, 16th Maine was on Oak Ridge.
That's right.
Yeah.
So he's with the 17th Maine, has a great book. And he writes, "The dead lay everywhere, and although not a half day had passed since they had died, the stench is so great that we can neither eat, drink, nor sleep." Decomposition commences as soon as life is extinct. No tongue can depict the carnage, and I cannot make it seem real. Men's heads blown off or split open, horrible gashes cut, some split from the top of the head to the extremities as butchers split beef. And there are so many of those kinds of quotes. So imagine a soldier. Imagine you see your brother or your father in that state. I mean, talk about post-traumatic stress syndrome. I can't even imagine.
No, you can't. We were talking, I forget who it was, but it doesn't matter. But I was having this conversation a couple days ago with someone, and the thought of going to war, and, you know, back in those days, you go, you sign up with your buddy, you stay in the same company.
Right.
And the thought of, you know, maybe sitting and having a good laugh over breakfast, and then we get called up and we have to go into a fight, and we start marching into a fight, you know, we've been here before, and it's not as bad as we think it is, or, you know, we thought it was, or whatever it is, you know. And if it were me, I'd probably be cracking jokes all the way up until the firing starts, and if I was, you know, allowed to, and my friend would be laughing, and then the next thing I know, he's gone.
Right. His head's blown off.
His head's blown off, or his torso's ripped in half from a cannonball, or God knows what. Right. And that's the thing, is the movie's never, as gory, the goriest war movie you could ever think of, very rarely, they don't get it. Like, they can't. To have someone's torso, just half of it just rip off.
And the scale of it, we're not talking about one or two, we're talking about hundreds of men, and maybe in the you know, in a brigade.
How about this, though? Not just the visual of that, but the sounds of it.
Yes.
You know,
and those who aren't dead, you know, the screaming, the begging for the mother.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, heart-wrenching.
Oh, did you ever watch Deadwood on HBO?
No.
Oh, it was a great show. I love that show. It was only on for 3 seasons. The characters and the scope of it got too big by season 3, and they couldn't afford it anymore. But it was a great show. And there was this one scene, I recently rewatched it, so it's fresh in my mind. There's this one scene where the local Sawbones, who clearly was an army surgeon during the war. This takes place in the 1870s.
Okay.
He's clearly got his own demons that he's dealing with, and he's alone in his house, and he's suffering from something, and he's drunk, and he starts praying, and he's screaming to God like he's trying to understand what his purpose is, and he starts mimicking the boys screaming for their mothers.
Oh, yeah.
And I swear to God, I can't even talk about it without getting choked up. But
yes.
But watching it is even worse. Like, he did a really good job with the acting there, because you really believed he heard it. But yeah, all that stuff. Now, that stuff's all done. The battle's over.
Right.
And now the poor people who didn't ask for this, the Gettysburg citizens, they've got to figure out what to do. That's
right.
All right. So Curtin and Wills, these guys are the early. But now, how is it presented to Curtin, or is it Curtin's idea? I don't know if we said that or not. Was it Curtin's idea that we're going to have a cemetery, or was it Wills's idea?
Well, I haven't gotten to that point.
Oh, okay,
yet.
Okay.
So at this point, it's only I've got to make sure that my citizens of Pennsylvania have somewhere to go, someone to talk to find out what happened to their loved ones.
Understood. Okay, so he is just saying, from the Pennsylvania troops, Wills, you're my point man. People are going to come to you. You got to figure out what happened to these boys since you're local.
That's correct.
Okay. And then how does that spread into the national cemetery?
Now, this whole story is filled with controversy. And that's why, if you like a mystery, there are so many mysteries, subsets in this book and in this whole story about not only how it started, but the dedication ceremony, all the way through.
Right.
So this is one of the first mysteries. And the question is, who is really the father of the cemetery? And if you ask David Wills, he'd say, I am. And if you ask Governor Curtin, he'd probably say, I am. Well, actually, it may be neither of those two. What happened was there was the agent. He was actually an assistant agent for the state of New York. His name was Theodore Diamond. And he was an ex-Army surgeon. And so he was doing the same kinds of things that Wills was doing in terms of interacting with loved ones, etc. And he said, you know, we've got to do something about these guys. So he went to David Wills, because David Wills was basically the head honcho. He was like the head of all of the agents, because it's Pennsylvania. And he says, can you call a meeting in your office of all the agents and let's talk about what's going on here? And David Wills says, sure. And at that meeting, supposedly, Theodore Diamond says, I think we need to buy some acreage and we have to give these guys a proper burial. Because what they would do, as we've talked about, and you know, Matt, is they'd have these long trenches and they'd throw them in. They needed to just get them out of the air.
It's a health concern.
Yes. But also what was happening is, you know, think about it. Your brother has been killed. And you're still on the battlefield. He was killed, let's say, on July the 3rd. But you're still there on the 4th. You're not going to let him sit there and rot.
No.
You're going to dig his own individual grave. You're going to make it as deep as you can, and you're going to put a headboard. Now you don't have anything fancy, so you're going to take a board from maybe a fence or something, and with a pencil, you're going to write his name, his company, and his regiment. And you're going to hope that down the road, someone, maybe a loved one, maybe the mother or the father or whatever, will come, know where the body is, dig him up, take him home. Well, what's happening and what everyone is concerned about, and by the way, we don't realize this. If you went on the battlefield then, a week or two after the battle, you would see literally a forest of these headboards, these impromptu headboards. We don't really think about that. You know, we think about either, you know, freshly dug graves or, you know, trenches. There's lots and lots of these headboards.
Sure.
And what's happening with these torrential rains and the like, the lettering is starting to fade. And there's a real concern from the agents and eventually to Curtin to say, we can't leave these impromptu headboards up. And then it got even worse. Because imagine, if you will, you got all the vermin, you got all the potential for disease. All right, you got everybody buried. Okay, so here come all these family members, and they're saying, there's my son's headboard. I'm going to dig him up. So you're digging him up. What's going to happen? All the flies are going to come back, more potential for disease.
Right.
And so Wills actually got the provost marshal to prevent any loved one from digging up any grave because of the concern about disease and the like and vermin. So the idea was, why don't we have a cemetery or a plot of ground? They weren't even thinking of national. They weren't thinking of anything big. It was, let's dig up our young men and let's put them in a place where we have a more permanent marker for them. And what's interesting is the day of or right after, Wills is going to send a letter to the governor saying, we need to do this. We need to have a cemetery. Now, Wills never acknowledges that Diamond was even at the meeting. He sort of takes credit for it, although he's going to do enough that he doesn't even have to be the father of the cemetery. In fact, it doesn't really even matter, you know, whose idea it was.
Not really.
So everybody, all the agents said, yeah, we ought to do this. We ought to work together and pay for it. They didn't even think about going to Washington. You know, back then it wasn't all, you know, deep pockets back then.
So it was going to be a private soldier cemetery.
Well, they weren't really certain of how it was going to be formed. It was more of an idea of, let's dig up all these impromptu graves and let's put them somewhere where they're all together, properly buried.
Yeah,
where we
okay.
have the time.
So it's get them in one place and done in the proper way.
That's
to
correct.
Prevent everything. And also, is there any consideration when they're talking about all this? Is there any consideration to the fact that these guys are buried on people's property?
Oh yes. And think about it. You're a farmer.
Yeah,
You're
I gotta
Nicholas
plow those
Cadore.
fields.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so you're trying to get back to normal.
right.
And so, you know, all your crops have been destroyed. Your livestock is gone. At least you want to put in a crop, you know, maybe next or winter wheat, whatever. But every time you start plowing, you hit another body.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, what are you going to do about it? Well, that's another reason, although the problem is they're going to leave the Confederate bodies there. So, you know, sort of plow around them. But the Union dead, we're going to move those. So that was the idea. And to his credit, as soon as Governor Curtin learned of this, he said, yeah, let's do it. And we'll pay for it. The state of Pennsylvania will pay for the land. And Will says, that's great. And so that starts the whole idea. And what's interesting is not only did Wills recommend this, he knew where he wanted to put it.
That was my next question. So did they have that location, the location it's in now, has that always been the first place they wanted to go to?
Approximately, yeah. It was in his mind.
That area there.
Yeah, it was in his mind.
And that was just what, a hayfield, I think, or something at the time of the battle. Who owned that? Was that
there were a
Menchie?
couple. The Menchie was one. There were a number of.
Oh yeah, there's a map in the book.
There
That's
is
the other thing, folks. There's maps in the book and illustrations and photos that help pull it all together. Where the hell did I see those maps?
It's in here.
I know. I was just looking. Oh, here.
What page is that?
It's page 32. 32, sir.
Okay.
So let's see. Additional acreage. Saunders' original design. There's all right. So there's Evergreen Cemetery.
Yeah. Okay. So if you look at if you go before that.
Yeah. You're right.
The page before.
30.
What it'll show is the Menchie and Benner were the two major landowners. It's interesting because when we think about East Cemetery Hill, so you got Baltimore Pike. Mm-hmm. When you think about East Cemetery Hill, you know, they got the cannons there. You've got Howard's monument, you know, statue, et cetera.
You wanted to put it there.
That's where initially he wanted to put it. He being David Wills.
David Wills, yeah. That's crazy.
And what's even more interesting is that, that was already spoken for. A certain figure was already talking about buying that property. But it's going to come. But ultimately, the thinking is right next to the Evergreen Cemetery, which sets up Gettysburg Battle number 2.
All right, so let's see. So here it says, unfortunately for Wills, his adversary, David McConaughey. Mm-hmm. How do you say it? McConaughey?
I say McConaughey.
Okay. Purchased the acreage before he could secure permission from Governor Curtin. So that is referring to the Menchie Raffensperger lots over on East Cemetery Hill, which are, I'm going to guess those are the ones that are just south of Hancock's statue and like where the 8th Ohio monument is. Is that right?
Essentially, yeah. It's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, because I say that because Menchie Spring is right down the hill from there.
Yeah. If you park around the where the National Cemetery is now, the gates, it would be across the road right there.
Yeah, straight across from the gatehouse.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So that was Wills's original location would be across the street from the two cemeteries.
Thinking.
That's what he was thinking. But McConaughey had already.
He had spoken to the landowners,
right?
And now the question, McConaughey was already buying up land for the battlefield preservation,
right?
So I'm not certain that if he was buying it up as part of that or buying it up because of his grand vision, and we can talk about his grand vision a little bit later on. But so that's going to be the battleground. It's going to be McConaughey versus Wills. Two very strong individuals.
Yeah.
Two very, they're both Republicans, both very entrenched in the community.
Both lawyers? What was
both attorneys, yes. Living literally within half a block away from each other.
Okay.
That wouldn't even talk to each other.
Through this whole thing? Or prior to?
This made it worse. They probably were adversarial. They probably represented different clients, but I don't think it got worse and worse. And, and I think there may have been some hard feelings because if you look at McConaughey's house, which is around, I think it's Mama Lucia's on Chambersburg Street.
Mama
Ventura's, yes, that area. Very plain. Mm-hmm. And then you look at David Wills's mansion. And David Wills, we're talking.
Now, how did he get? Okay, so now hold on. McConaughey is older than Wills.
He is.
So he's been in practice longer.
He has been. And
so
here's this young guy, 32 years old.
32 years old, and he's got this mansion on the square, whereas McConaughey's just off the square.
Off the square.
So how does Wills get that mansion?
Because
it's nice inside.
He listened to my mother.
Your mother's that old.
And no lie, when I was growing up, when I was a boy, my mother would take me aside, and she had all these words of wisdom.
Sure.
Look both ways when you're crossing a street.
Right. Don't pick your nose.
Yeah, in public. But she would say, Brad, it's just as easy, and she was very deadly serious. It's just as easy to fall in love with a rich woman as a poor one. And I'd look at her cross-eyed and say, oh, I'm going to do it for love, Mom.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. And, of course, I married a poor woman. He listened to my mother. He married a very wealthy woman. Actually, she came from a very wealthy family in York, Pennsylvania. And so I'm sure that the family helped subsidize the house. He had his office in the first floor, and it was, it was a nice situation. Beautiful house.
It's a gorgeous house.
And that's how
I wonder if he had to deal with college kids walking at 3 a.m, drunk and loud and obnoxious, or was that not a thing back then?
I think they were much better behaved back then. I hope.
I have a feeling they were. Or maybe we idealized the past too much. But either way, they couldn't have been as bad as today's kids. So, all right. So, where was I going with all that? Okay, so so you think he married money, and that's how he got that house?
Definitely married. You got a beautiful house.
Well, ladies, I have plans. If there's anybody, any moneyed women out there,
that's it.
I've got some big plans, but I need your family's fortune's help.
There you go.
Okay, so they don't. Well, maybe that's part of the reason why McConaughey doesn't like him either, is because he's this little kid. He's got a better house than him, and all he had to do was marry for it. Whereas I'm working for it. And
I think that may have been how it germinated. But they were very active in the community.
Yeah.
And but they were never in the same organizations. They would keep themselves separate.
It's still like that. People are.
Yeah.
It's so silly. Small town politics is.
Yeah. So
you live too close to be enemies.
Yeah. But the community was better for it because you had two very strong-willed individuals who cared about Gettysburg, and they really wanted to make it better. And if they didn't get along, at least it was below the surface, at least before the war.
They kept it civil in public, is what you're saying.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, I don't think it ever got bad
They were professionals.
until this point.
Oh, until this point. Okay, now is when it starts to get nasty.
Now it's going to get pretty bad because they start to, the agents are starting to consider what this thing's going to look like. And ultimately they're going to buy, they want to buy the land. They want to begin to develop everything. They need to say, okay, what's interesting is if you take the Antietam Cemetery, which actually is going to not start the planning until 1864 after this, they actually entertain the idea of burying both Union and Confederate dead in the National Cemetery there in Sharpsburg.
Could you imagine?
They didn't even consider that here.
Right.
And so it became one of the big issues was, okay, it's going to cost thousands of dollars, maybe 30, 40,000 above the land purchase to dig up the dead and cart them, rebury them, put them in a casket, et cetera, with a nice headstone, or at least, the rows of headstones. And who's going to pay for it?
Mm-hmm.
And that became, I thought that would have been a real battle because, they could have done it in different ways. The state of New York, which had the most dead, could have been assessed on the basis of the number of dead. And so you take a state like Illinois, which has, they had very few dead. You would think that they would pay very little. But they didn't do it that way. The way they did it was on the basis of the size of the state.
Like the geographical size?
So they actually looked at the number of House members in the House of Representatives. And so if you take the state of Massachusetts, they had 158 men that had to be moved and buried, compared to the state of Illinois that only had 6. But they didn't do it on that basis. They did it on the basis of how many people are in the state, and that translates into the number of congressmen.
Okay.
Massachusetts actually only had to pay $8,000 for the 158 men, Illinois, that had 6 men dead, they paid $12,000 as their share. So, it all related, and they all agreed to it, and the governors agreed to it. And what's so interesting is, remember, it's not just Wills working with the agents. He's also working directly with all of these governors.
Yeah.
Because he can't rely on the agents to get this done. Remember, many of these states, like New York, they're Democratic. They're Democrats who are running it, and there's this natural pull and tug with the Republicans.
Yeah.
So he's communicating and writing letters to all of the governors, Governor Todd of Ohio, et cetera, to get them on board. And this is something that's very, very concerning to Governor Curtin. It can't be, 8 of the governors are doing it one way and the other governors aren't. So you can't have some of the bodies moved and not the others.
No, you got to do it all the same way.
So here's the state of Massachusetts. No offense against people from Massachusetts. You're not from Massachusetts, are you? No. Good.
No.
They wanted to do it their own way. They wanted to go off on their own, have their own plot of land, and, rebury the men there.
Have their own plot of land here?
Yes, in Gettysburg.
But it wasn't good enough to be with everybody else that fought alongside the Massachusetts men.
They said, you know what? There's this beautiful private cemetery, Evergreen Cemetery.
Yeah.
We can buy a piece of that land right there. The board will sell it to us, and we'll just put it there. Well, that would have really put a hamper and a damper on this national cemetery if one went off on its own. And we have to understand about. So let's get to McConaughey.
Okay.
McConaughey, however you want to pronounce it. He's the president of the board of Evergreen Cemetery. And they are struggling financially. Not only they were even before the battle, but, you read the accounts, the headstones were destroyed, so many of them. And the ground is really... I won't say destroyed, but really disturbed. It's going to take thousands and thousands of dollars to put it back. And his idea is, wow, if we can get that national cemetery within Evergreen Cemetery, we have a funding stream that's going to make us whole. And so that's what that's what he's thinking. It's going to save Evergreen Cemetery.
Right.
David Wills, no. It has to be separate. You can't put it within Evergreen Cemetery.
Right.
It's just not going to work.
No, because then the Confederacy is right, states' rights, and then we can break away. Like, just think of the optics of that.
Yes.
You've got the National Cemetery with all the Union states represented in there that were here, except Massachusetts.
Right. So
they want to go do their own thing. I
right.
seem to remember Massachusetts starting some other kind of like separatist trouble, maybe 80-something years earlier.
Yes. Yeah, I think so too. They were troublemakers.
They were. They just don't like getting along with other people, right? And being in a group. They want to be their own island.
Yes.
The people that settled Massachusetts should have found an island instead of part of the continent.
I think so.
They should have gone up to Nova
Very
Scotia or
independent
something.
people.
Yeah.
Too much Samuel Adams beer, I think.
That must be what it is. Okay,
so that's
McConaughey.
going to set up this battle between, do we put it in the National Cemetery? In Evergreen, do we have our own standalone? And guess who's right in the middle? You have 2 influential attorneys, both fairly wealthy, very influential, both Republicans, and here's Governor Curtin right in the middle. And these guys are not only sending telegrams, they're going up there and, pounding on his desk saying this is the way it should be. And it got so bad at one point where Wills did not want to talk to McConaughey. So he says, okay, we're going to have a national cemetery. And if we can't get the land we want because McConaughey's buying it, he was buying it $200 an acre. If we can't get it from him, and he didn't want to negotiate with him either, we're going to put it on Cemetery Ridge. And that's when influential people from Gettysburg, including Reverend Schmucker and Bulger, president of Pennsylvania College, and a number of other influential people who really were behind this whole effort of a cemetery. They said the worst thing we can do is put on Cemetery Hill, a Cemetery Ridge. It has to be in a place of honor, a place that is very distinct. It has to be on Cemetery Hill. Well, Wills didn't want to talk to McConaughey, and McConaughey wasn't selling that land so fast. And so there needed to be some way to break the logjam. And Curtin, he didn't get to be governor because he was stupid. You know, he's pretty shrewd himself.
Right.
He says, okay, let me get two influential Republicans, David Beeler, who is the postmaster of Gettysburg, and Edward Fonstock, who owned the Fonstock building, dry goods store. Let them mediate, because the two men, McConaughey and Wills, will not be even in the same room together. And so they're going back and forth, trying to negotiate. And McConaughey says, look, he says, I want to do what's best for Gettysburg, for the country, and I will sell you at my cost what I bought. You know, you can have it. And Wills is not even certain he wants to do that. They're both kind of thin-skinned at this point. He's calling. Now think about it. You're McConaughey. You're willing to sell the land that you bought at what you paid for, and your adversary is calling you a land speculator. A dirty speculator. It's like, wait a minute. I'm trying to be good about all of this. And I mean, it got pretty bad. There was a case, and it still surprises me. Imagine you're David McConaughey.
Okay.
You hop on a train. You go over to see Governor Curtin, and when you're gone, David Wills is knocking on the door of some of the landowners that have committed to sell their land to, and this is Menchie and Raffensperger, who had committed. I don't think they had anything in writing yet. It was only verbal, to McConaughey.
Okay.
Will you change your mind? Will you sell it to us and to me instead? I mean, it was that kind of. So you can imagine. McConaughey comes back. He says, "What the heck are you doing, talking to my people?"
Right.
So it got pretty bad.
Pretty slimy. They're all running around talking to people and tattling and trying to get people to turn.
But the motives, for the most part, were pure.
Right. They're all trying to do the right thing, and they think they have the answer to what is right.
And it wasn't that it was not for personal gain.
Right.
It was what they thought was the best approach.
Yeah. And that is interesting that it got so bitter and neither one stood to get rich off of it.
Right.
That's what's weird about it. It's like they were fighting, I guess, for legacy, to be the one who.
I think Wills.
I don't know.
I think Wills, because he was dealing. Think about this. You're dealing constantly with grieving loved ones.
Yeah.
And you're constantly seeing the dead, being embalmed, etc. And so for him, it was much more real for him. McConaughey was very much Gettysburg centric. We're going to do whatever's best for this town. I'm going to start buying up some land with this new association, Preservation Association, because we can't let developers buy all this land. So they all had good motives. They just could not seem, they were too strong. They were too, it would be like Rockefeller putting him in the room with Carnegie or something, So, but ultimately, it worked. And the way it worked was these two mediators, actually were working directly with the board of Evergreen Cemetery. And I don't think McConaughey was actually against the idea. But ultimately what happened was the board says, fine, we will sell you these acres at what we paid for on Cemetery Hill, adjacent to the Evergreen Cemetery, on one condition. And the condition was there will be no demarcation, there'll be no line between the Evergreen Cemetery and the National Cemetery.
Interesting.
And the reason they said that was, think about it. If you can buy a plot of land that is contiguous, you're a civilian, contiguous with the National Cemetery, that plot's probably going to be worth more.
Sure.
And they could raise more money. And so that was their compromise, and they said, that's fine.
It looks nicer, I would imagine. I haven't seen it that way, but it would look nicer for an unbroken cemetery landscape up on that hill than without that fence in the middle of it.
Well, but they had to compromise because you start when you start laying it out, it became, well, we're going to need to have something.
Yeah.
And okay, we're not going to have a fence that's a board fence or something. It's going to be an open iron fence, and they compromised.
Okay.
So that's why we have that today. But initially, that barricade would not have been there. That fence would have been gone.
Good fences make great neighbors, they say.
That's true. That's true.
So okay, so they decide that it's going to be where it's going to be,
Right.
and now the task of making it a cemetery has to begin.
Oh, yes.
And-
It's one step after the other.
Yeah.
And none of them's easy.
No. So is there any controversy or roadblocks along the way? Once they have the land, now we have to start making it a cemetery.
Right.
How are we going to lay it out? Who comes up with that design?
And there's another problem.
Uh-oh. Always a
Not
problem.
easy. So who are they going to go to? Well, they want to go to a preeminent landscape architect.
Okay.
And his name is William Saunders. He's Scottish, from
Sure.
Scottish descent. Actually, he's got a brogue. And he helped to lay out Central Park. He's a natural. The problem is he works for the government. They're paying his salary. This is not, it says a national cemetery. It's not a national cemetery. The federal government has not paid a cent. They're not even involved in any of this at this
Right.
point. And so they actually talked to Lincoln, and Lincoln, I guess it was Lincoln, but ultimately they're able to get his services.
Saunders's.
Saunders services. So Saunders comes to Gettysburg, and who's going to walk him around the site?
Well, I wanted to say David Wills, but it is
David
David Wills.
Wills.
Okay. All right.
David Wills walks him around. He says, "Yeah." He says, "I like this. This is good." He says, I don't like it. It's too small. The way you have it all cut up, and I have that map of it in there.
Yeah.
We need to even it out. And so you need to buy 5 more acres.
Oh.
Well, fortunately, it wasn't that difficult to buy these 5 because they were dealing directly with the landowners, and the landowners were saying, "Yeah, it's for a good cause," and they got it. They got fair market
Pretty
value.
penny, yeah. What 5 acres is it? Is it the
It's-
annex?
Yeah, no, actually, it's in that area. In fact, if you look at the map,
In just north of the cemetery, like in front of it there?
it's right there. You can see.
on page.
It's in between. It's at the actual intersection. It's at the very
additional
top
acreage.
of where Baltimore Pike and you can see Taneytown or Emmitsburg.
Yeah, the Emmitsburg Road and the Baltimore
Actually,
Pike.
that should be Taneytown Road. But anyway, no, that's
No, wait, where are we? Yeah, no, you're right. It should be Tawny.
Yeah.
Well, wait, where are we talking there? So yeah, the annex that would be Tawnytown Road still.
right.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay, so but anyway, if you have the book while you're listening to this, it's page 32 is the map
Yes.
that he was pointing to there.
so they buy the extra land, and most of us don't realize how special the layout is. Because
tell us about that.
yeah, he wasn't just laying out a cemetery.
Right.
He wanted the way he's going to lay it out is that it's going to be a place of. There were several things he was trying to do. One, it's a place of reflection, where loved ones, where people who aren't related, like you and I, to any of the dead, can come and reflect on what these men did. Number one, and he wanted it to be a place of great serenity as well. He wanted it also to be almost like it wasn't an arboretum. You go there and you say, "Wow, there's a red maple tree," and it's actually there's a
Little sign
there.
that says,
Yes.
yeah. Oh, so that was
And-
part of the original plan?
Oh yes.
Oh, no kidding.
They have these plaques, from a poem, Bivouacs of the Dead.
Yeah.
What most people don't know.
Yes, they do.
Do they know it?
Tim Smith told us on an earlier episode.
Yes.
Gilligan's Island? Oh.
You got me.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, then most people don't know. Maybe they do. I don't know. What were you going to say?
That it was it relates to the Mexican-American War. And the person who actually wrote it was a colonel in the Confederate Army during the Civil War.
No kidding.
Yes.
Who?
I can't. It's probably here somewhere.
Okay. It's in the book, ladies and gentlemen.
It's
You'll
in
have
the
to
book.
buy the book. Lincoln
but
comes to Gettysburg.
But what's interesting is that you find it in other national cemeteries. Like you go to Antietam.
Sure.
It has the same poem because it's universal.
Moving though. I mean, it's
very much so.
very solemn and it's a good poem. And now this is news to you, apparently. It fits perfectly with the melody of the theme to Gilligan's Island.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So next time you go in the cemetery and go around, every plaque, if you sing the words on the plaque to Gilligan's Island, it fits perfectly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'll have to remember that.
Yeah. So that's just a little.
So there's what's so beautiful about the layout is the symmetry.
Yes.
And even there was a battle because David Wills didn't want that.
What did he
David
want?
Wills did not believe that you do it by state. You do it by regiment. And almost like order of battle.
Yeah.
So the First Corps and their dead are going to be in one spot, the Second Corps in a different spot.
See, I kind of like that idea better.
And Governor Wills said, remember, we need every state and every governor to be on board. And so what are they going to support? They're going to support where they have their own little space. In the case of New York, their big space within the cemetery.
So it's a business decision to stick with the states.
It was.
Yeah.
The worst thing that would have happened would have been 5 states said, nope, we're out.
Yeah.
We're not going to do this.
Right, because then you got to have all or nothing.
That's right.
Well, maybe now, since they're all dead, we can mix them up by corps or something.
We could do that,
yeah,
sure.
That would be nice. I think it would just be easier.
You can take
to
up a
understand.
collection.
I'm going to, yeah. We'll start a GoFundMe.
So what's happening then is, and then he also agreed that there needs to be a sufficient and beautiful monument right in the middle of the semicircle.
Yeah.
So that was all. He arranged all of that. It was his plan. And it really is a model of how a cemetery should be.
It's a nice one. I've been to the one at. I haven't been to Arlington yet, and I really want to go there. But I haven't. I've been to the one at Antietam, which is also nice. I think ours is a little nicer.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I mean, each one has their own headstone at Antietam, but so many of them are wearing away. You can't see the name of the soldier, whereas these are not as obtrusive.
Right.
I mean, you walk around and it's a different feeling.
It is. To me, it's a little more moving to I can see from a distance away a headstone that's upright.
Right.
But these, I have to walk amongst them in order to see the name of whoever's in it. And to me, that's a little more, there's something more moving about coming upon them flush with the ground.
I agree.
Right?
I agree with you.
Yeah. It feels like less of a cemetery. It feels like you're just coming upon all these dead. Yeah. Now, what is there a significance to the design, the semicircle?
I think it was more along the lines of not wanting to put one state above the other.
Okay, so everybody's just all in this. Yeah, okay. Well, and it looks nice.
Because there's no real front and back per se. You
right.
know? I mean, there's front and backs within each section, but it more or less flows. Okay,
so now we've got the land. They're getting closer to figuring out how the layout's going to go. Mm-hmm. We got to get the bodies in there.
Well, this is what is so crazy to me, and that is David Wills is not letting any grass grow under him. And I have some dates. Yes. So remember, the Battle of Gettysburg is over on July the 3rd, right? Mm-hmm. He puts an advertisement in the paper in mid-October that he's asking for bids for a company or a person who will move the bodies. It is due to be open about a week later on the 22nd, and on the 26th, the bodies are to begin to be moved. So less than a week after you have gotten the bid, Matt. Mm-hmm. Within a week, you're expected to start the process. It was boom, boom, boom.
Right, very quickly.
Very, very quickly.
Is there a reason? I mean, a specific reason, or is it several reasons?
those headstones, those impromptu boards,
Right.
here comes winter.
Time
and
is working against you.
It really
You've got to
is.
get these in there. So yeah, everything's working against you. So you
Yes.
got to get them in. So I'd imagine that, and by the way, if you want, ladies and gentlemen, to read the chapter that is about what we're about to get into, that's chapter 5, moving the corpses. And it is just as delicious as it sounds with the descriptions in here. But really, like, I mean, and it was funny because you were talking in the book about, I think, is it Weaver? Who was the superintendent of the...
Well, you
what was
had
the title of the? It was like collecting the dead or something.
Okay, well, there's two. There's Frank Beisinger.
Right.
He gets the main contract.
Right.
And the contracts range from $1.59 a corpse to $8. Now, Beisinger was a local guy. Couldn't find a photo of him. And so they knew Beisinger. They knew he could do a good job. And he had the low bid.
Mm-hmm.
So that was set. But obviously, he can't do it himself. So he's going to have two guys on either end. So here you've got Samuel Weaver, and he's got the worst job of it.
Yeah, that's who I'm
He's-
thinking of.
Yeah.
Weaver.
He's the superintendent of exhuming the bodies.
Yes. What a title.
Ugh. And so it is his responsibility to dig down with his crew. He's not digging, but he's supervising it. Dig down, expose the body, coffins, and again, this is David Wills. He is meticulous. He doesn't want a slapdash job. So he says, okay, part of the deal is you can only move 100 bodies, no more than 100 bodies a day. You could do 200. You could have all kinds of crews, but we're going to lose track of these guys. They're not going to get the kind of respectful, exhuming as they should and reburial.
Right.
Only 100 per day.
Okay.
And so he's still right in the middle of the process. And so what's going to happen is you're going to have, so you've got Samuel Weaver, who is going to be responsible for, exposing the bodies, pulling them out, and then we can talk about this, identifying the body.
This was the part that really gets you.
Putting them into a coffin, and then if you know the guy's name, putting his name and unit on, writing it in pencil on the top of the lid of the coffin, in a wagon, over to the National Cemetery, where James Townsend and his crew is waiting. He's the superintendent of burials, and he is going to then supervise putting the body into the ground, covering it up, keeping track, because they haven't started getting those stones yet. But this is interesting. At the end of every day, Weaver and Townsend have to come into Gettysburg. They have to go to David Wills's office, and they have to present him with these two lists, and he's going to cross-check to make sure everything is accurate.
When I read that part, I was like, wow, this guy was really on top of things. Like, this wasn't a half-ass job.
No.
And so that when we found since then some of those mistaken burials, or accidental burials, or whatever you want to call them and stuff, like it wasn't because of carelessness.
Oh, no.
I mean, those were really true, genuine mistakes and oversights or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, if you have a canteen, there's no other information on this guy, and there's a canteen or a knapsack that says John Smith from the 17th Maine. You're going to assume it's John Smith, when in fact it's a Confederate who picked up that canteen or knapsack.
And there's I forget the guy's name, but I want to say that he lived very long and later died in Kansas. Do you remember who I'm talking about there? There's one guy who is buried there.
Okay.
But he survived the war.
Oh, yeah.
But he had somehow, the guy who died had somehow gotten a hold of some of his, one or two of his articles of clothing or whatever it was.
That's not uncommon.
Right.
Right.
I mean, you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. Yes. Like if let's say someone's wounded, he's not going to be around, and oops, my cartridge box broke or whatever. Well, here, take mine.
Right.
But I scribbled into the back of the strap or something my name.
That's right.
And then the guy I gave it to dies, and, I mean, yeah.
That's
So
right.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so now, but wait. So you had mentioned before, and you said we could talk about this. Oh, identifying the bodies.
Yeah.
So Weaver, the superintendent of exhuming the bodies, I just would have called it of exhumation, but whatever. So one of the ways he's got to do it, and I'm guessing Townsend too, when he receives them, he's got to do it the same way, just to double check, or is he taking
No,
Weaver's
I
word
think
for it?
It's my understanding it was just Weaver
Okay.
who had to do this.
So Weaver, sometimes it's hard to identify the guy.
Oh, yeah.
The headboard might be gone. It might be ineligible or illegible.
Right. Or there might not be one.
Right. And so next thing he's got to do is rummage through the corpse. And now, in the case of the guys who died on the first day, there's very little. They're skeletons at this point, right? Because you're talking about how they were laying out exposed longer than others, so they were decomposing sooner.
That's correct.
And by the time they were put in the ground, they were already well into rotting.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
And so, but the guys who were buried almost immediately, they're still kind of a meaty mix of soup and dirt. And
Yeah. Well,
so you got to go through their greasy pockets and try to find something.
I think the key is if you can find a canteen or a knapsack, you're golden.
Yeah.
But you're right. If absent that, and there's no other marking on that guy, there's no letters or something hanging around, they're thrown in the grave, you have to check his pockets.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you have to understand, we're talking October is when it begins. They're going to be continuing the process into the following year. So lots of rain, lots of vermin. And do you, Matt, want to put your hand in his? No.
No, I don't.
And so
and they don't have latex gloves back then.
No, they did not. And so Weaver is going to devise a contraption. It's like a metal hook.
Yeah.
Where he can put it into the pocket, wet pocket that remains. He's going to pull it out. In fact, probably one of the best things would be those guys who died early in July 1, because the uniform might have decayed to the point where there is no pocket, but there's a letter or there's something or there's some information that's just laying next to the body. But someone who is well preserved, uniform-wise, then you're going to have to take this hook and yank it out with the contents and hope you can identify it. And when you think about it, the vast majority they were able to identify.
That's what did cross my mind, is that it's amazing that they know the names of so many of them. And this
It really
poor
is.
bastard had to go picking through their pockets to try to find out who they were. What if they couldn't identify them? Like, because we have, we have the unknown sections.
Yes.
But then within the states, we have unknown graves.
Right.
So what's the distinction there? What's the difference?
So let's say, I'm trying to think. Let's say where the 17th Maine was fighting in the wheat field.
Okay.
And they were basically all by themselves, right in by that stone wall. If they knew that there were other men who were, and assuming that the burial trench is going to be right there, which it probably was, and they're seeing all these other guys that have designation of 17 Maine, but they find others that have no designation, they assume that they must be from Maine.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's an area such as, some areas of the wheat field, which went back and forth, where they couldn't tell where anybody was.
God, what a mess. Yeah.
Then they probably would put them in the unknown section.
No, so is that the prevailing theory that a lot of the unknowns, of course not all, but a lot of the unknowns are from the wheat field?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay.
They'd be all over the battlefield.
Right.
But the
Yeah.
ones who, more like I'm thinking, trying to think of some other areas where it wasn't just one unit fighting, in a certain area.
You got a little bit of that on Culp's Hill, sort of.
Yeah. Not too many killed there. But all right, well, let's say, maybe Cemetery Hill. maybe the top of
yeah.
Cemetery Hill.
Yeah, yeah.
Where you had
yeah.
Ohio troops, you had some New York troops, some Pennsylvania troops, and it was chaos up there
Right.
on the evening of July 2nd. And so probably they were all mixed up.
Yeah.
Whereas where you had a specific area like that, behind that stone wall, you didn't have a lot of back and forth.
Right. Okay. I got you.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that's interesting, Matt, is about the coffins.
I was just going to ask you about it. Go ahead. Go
Okay.
ahead. Yeah.
Because, when people go to the train station, they have a variety of things they think about. They think about it was a hospital. They think about some guys got up into the cupola and they're watching Pickett's charge, supposedly, and they're scribbling their names, on the walls of the cupola.
They're watching Pickett's charge from the train station?
Yeah, from the train station,
I've never heard
supposedly
that.
all the way
You
down.
can see Pickett's charge
That's
from
what
the...
they said.
Okay.
Well, if you take the Michaels, the Jacobs, Michael Jacobs,
Yeah.
and his son
But
Howard.
his house is on higher ground than the train station. The train station's down at the bottom of a hill.
Yeah,
And Pickett's charge is on the bottom of the hill on the other side of the hill.
yeah. Anyway,
Whatever.
who knows? These guys, when you read their accounts, especially later on in life, they do tend to exaggerate.
Yeah.
In
yeah.
fact, that's one of the challenges my wife and I had when we wrote about Lincoln's visit.
Uh-huh.
But that's another
Okay,
story.
yeah. You'd have to read the book to even know what he's talking about
Yeah.
with the visit. 'Cause
You definitely got to
We're
read
not
the book.
covering that today, folks.
Right. But something else you need to think about is, as you look where those railroad tracks are, imagine about at least 100 coffins are sitting there, just waiting, empty coffins, brought in by train from Harrisburg or Hanover, and just sitting there waiting. And every morning, Leander Warren would talk about this, a young man with his dad. They'd employed wagoneers, where they would put the coffins on the back of the wagons. They would ride out to where Samuel Weaver on that part of the battlefield that he was exhuming the bodies. They'd wait, and then the coffins were loaded onto the back of those wagons, and then they went to the National Cemetery. So you would have this almost like a mountain of coffins there, because, again, David Wills did not want 200, 300, 500 burials in one day.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So that way it's going to be very, very measured.
So they pick up an empty coffin. How many coffins could the Weavers get on their wagon? Was it 6? 5 or 6?
Probably. I'm not quite certain about that.
And then the other guy that had a contract to do that was Basil Biggs, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes. And he had a wagon that could hold 9.
Oh, yeah.
He had a
Yes.
luxury wagon.
Well, he was, when you think about the African American community, Basil Biggs may be one of the stars, so to
Yeah.
speak, in terms of history of the...
Oh, he impresses me.
Yes, very
Yeah.
much so. And when you think about, the Catherine Foster home, the stately house, he owned that house. But he was working with the crews in the exhuming the bodies. And so...
Was it just those two, Weaver and Biggs? No.
They had a whole crew.
But I'm saying, was it just the two of them that did the transportation, or did they have more?
Oh, no, there were more than
There
that.
were, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They'd have to,
Yeah.
when you think about it. Now, they would go back and forth, these wagons, but it was a constant churn back and forth.
What was the daily limit of burials that he wanted?
100.
100. So 15. So basically, right? Because no, what am I doing with my math here? 14. They could do 14
Each trip.
if the two of them were going at the same
Yeah,
time.
but
let's
I
say.
think it's more than... I think what
Yeah,
happened
you have
was-
to have more than that.
Yeah. Well, the Warrens were doing it. There were a number of different Teamsters. They were borrowing their,
Okay.
hiring their wagons,
So
going back and forth.
That makes 100 sound more doable then. If
Yeah.
you have more people. All right, so they go to the exhumation site,
Yes.
load up the casket.
Yes.
Well, they don't load the casket. Weaver does. Weaver
Weaver is
Weaver
supervising
oversees the loading of the casket.
that's correct.
Or the coffin, excuse me.
Yes.
And then he writes the name of the soldier, if they know it, on the lid,
And he's also keeping
and
track
he's writing it on paper.
because he's got to give it to Wills.
Wills, right. So then they'll load them onto the wagons. The wagons will go over to the cemetery.
Right.
And then they'll go back to the train station, pick up some more empties, and go back and do it all over
That's
again.
correct.
And they'll keep
All
doing that
through
until
the
they
day.
hit their quota for the day.
That's correct. Yes.
That has got to be the most depressing, smelly job that these guys didn't all. And I don't say this lightly, but that they didn't all blow their heads off after this. Do we know of any that like couldn't handle what they saw in helping to do this? That
Not familiar with that.
yeah,
But what's
they were stronger back then.
What's sad is when you see there's a wonderful iconic photograph, and I have it in the book, showing a burial party or an exhuming party, and they're all men of color.
Was that the one? That's not the one of Basil Biggs on the Town Road that you're talking about. Oh no, it's page 52.
Okay.
Yep, 52. The remarkable shot
That's
shows
it.
Samuel Weaver with the notebook in hand to the right, overseeing the removal of the corpse from the battlefield. He used a small metal hook to remove the contents of the men's pockets and wrote each soldier's name and unit on the lid of the casket.
So I don't know. You know, many of these young men of color probably experienced all kinds of issues during their life, and I don't know if they were better steeled to seeing some of these horrible sights or not.
Right.
We just don't have a record of that.
Yeah, I mean, the one guy in the center there, he's just got his arms crossed over the lid there. He's looking pretty confident and kind of like, or fed up. I can't tell.
Hard to say.
It's hard to say. It's either a strong pose or a, man, I'm sick of this shit type of pose.
But you know, they would have to have several of these crews because these four guys could not be digging up 100 guys in a day.
No. Where do we know where this picture was taken?
I do not.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder where that fence is. It's a
It's
pretty
a high
tall
fence.
fence.
It's an unusual fence.
Yeah.
Yeah. With a building behind it.
I wonder if it's the Sherfy house.
I don't know.
I don't either. Well, anyway. Okay, so they go and they bury them. The burials now. So here's something that I heard, that if you go and stand at, let's say, what was Richard Nixon's grandfather's name? George Nixon?
I believe
right?
so,
If you go to
yeah.
George Nixon's, all right, you go and you sit and you look at it so that you can read George Nixon. You're actually standing on like the shins of the guy behind you, and not George Nixon. George Nixon's head is on the other side of that stone. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
And I've heard that it's because it's supposed to be, I guess, symbolic, so that on Judgment Day, when they're resurrected from the dead, they could all sit up and look out on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that sounds pretty and beautiful and all, but then you really think about it. I go, wait a second. I died here. Why the hell would I want to go and look at where I died?
I don't think that part I don't agree with.
Yeah.
I think the key was 100 guys. They want to get these guys buried as quickly as they possibly can.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter that their feet are where their feet are facing. Like, you don't think they're all facing that way?
I don't think so.
No. I honestly don't either. But it's a nice little sentiment.
It is.
You know,
It is. There's a lot of fictions.
But there's a lot of fact in this book, ladies and gentlemen. Lincoln Comes to Gettysburg by Bradley Gottfried and Linda Gottfried. Linda didn't want to do this, right? She's too shy.
I'm the spokesperson.
Okay, you're the one who goes out and speaks.
Yes.
Is this the first book you guys did together?
No.
What's the other one?
We survived our first one, and we're working on a third. The first one was Hell Comes to Southern Maryland.
Oh, I'm guessing that's about Antietam?
Nope.
Oh.
It's about, we used to live in Southern Maryland. I was president of the College
So it
of
was an
Southern Maryland.
autobiography.
It felt that way at times. If you go further south, all the way, it feels like you're going down to the Antarctic. But down to the tip of St. Mary's County is the largest prisoner of war camp of Confederate soldiers in the North. Point Lookout, prisoner of war camp.
That's right.
And so I've always had a feeling, a need, if you will, to write something about an area where I was living.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt, okay, I owed it to the guards, to the prisoners, to those who died. I lived in Southern Maryland. All the books that were around were really thick books. Oh, and people don't want to read these thick books. You know, they want a thin book that's maybe 150 pages. So we did that. I've done one on the Philadelphia Brigade because I was working in Philadelphia. I grew up in Philadelphia. I did another one on the 1st New Jersey Brigade because I was in New Jersey.
Right.
And so, and now I'm, working on books relating to Gettysburg and Antietam.
So it's just so if you move to Siberia, then one day you're going to write books about Siberia.
Definitely. I will definitely do that.
Talk about horror stories. All right. Well, so you can get this book Amazon. I believe I've seen it at For the Historian. Is that correct?
Yeah. For the Historian, they have it at Gallery 30.
Gallery
I'm
30.
sure they have it at the Heritage Center.
But of course, if you go to For the Historian, they're a sponsor of Addressing Gettysburg, and if you mention us, you get 20% off. So make sure you go to For the Historian.
And there's one place in town that does not stock it, where you would think it would be stocked, but it is not.
At the Visitor Center?
I'm not saying that.
Oh, you're not saying where?
It's a place where you can get lots of fudge and toy cannons.
Okay. It's the Visitor Center then. That's crazy, really?
Well, times
do they not have any of these
it's
Civil
my
War?
understanding not. But, I think they have emerging.
But not yours.
In fairness to the park and especially to the bookstore there, the pandemic has created all kinds of havoc with purchasing, et cetera. And so the reason why, especially why Gallery 30 and why For the Historian has it is because my wife and I went over and said, hey, how would you like to buy some of these?
Yes, very good.
And
Good
so
thinking.
I know in both cases they sold out. And the Heritage Center, they've been doing a pretty good business as well, period. And at all of these places, they are, if you get it locally, they are signed by my wife and I.
Yes, I have a signed copy
That's right.
here.
Yes, you
Signed
do.
and inscribed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we like you.
Well, I'm glad you do. I'm glad you do. The audience likes having you on, and I'm sure they're going to like. Well, I know they like the books that you've had out for a while. Of course, the Maps of Gettysburg is one of the big books that a lot of us have. And this is a new one here. The Lincoln Comes to Gettysburg, ladies and gentlemen. I recommend you get it. It is an easy read, but that doesn't mean it's lacking in information. I don't know how you make it easy yet full of facts that are very interesting. I found the whole chapter. This morning I read the chapter about the exhumations, and I was like, man, you can't imagine it. We're so lucky that we live when we live.
Yes.
We're so detached from death and all that stuff. I don't know, maybe we're not lucky. Because if the shit ever hits the fan again, then we're going to all be traumatized. Well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, folks.
But what I really want is, so many visitors come to Gettysburg and they think it was a glorious battle and all these wonderful charges and heroic men, and there were all of that. Mm-hmm. But too often we don't think about the horror of just the soldiers, whether wounded or killed or even not, what they had to go through, and the civilians, et cetera. And telling that story, as you mentioned, Matt, in a way that people really want to read it. Not a thick book that they have to wade through, but something that has lots of photographs and lots of illustrations. And hopefully I can come back and talk about the rest of the story, which continues with Lincoln, why the committee of all these agents didn't want him to even come.
Let's do that. Let's have you come on and talk about Lincoln's visit when he's here.
Yeah.
And I don't want people to not get the book. I don't want to do the whole book here. I want
That's
them to
okay.
get it.
I'm having a good time.
All right, good. Oh, good. Well, then we'll talk about every damn chapter if you want.
Let's see. Chapter 1. Let me start reading.
There you go. It's an audiobook, except it's free. That's not fair. Get the book. Amazon, For the Historian. Our website, we'll put it up there too, addressinggettysburg.com. Lincoln Comes to Gettysburg. Brad Gottfried, thank you very much. Thank you all for watching and listening, and we will talk to you next time. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We did good.
I really like talking with you. It's very easy.
Yeah. Well,
you know how to be interviewed.
Because I was on the other side.
Yes. Well, some people are just good at it without having been, but yeah, that helps, I'm sure.
And you can tell I enjoy it.
Yes.
Whether it sells a book or nothing, it's okay. I'm just having a good time.
I think it will. I mean, we're we're very lucky in that our listeners really like what we do and they listen to what we recommend.